so far we can say in Christian philosophy there's been a theme or tendency of at least incorporating some Neoplatonic elements, at least in explanation. It doesn't mean that Christianity is intrinsically Neoplatonic or anything like that. But what we see in Thomas Aquinas is a switch to Aristotelianism. Thomas introduces a bunch of Aristotelian language that, frankly, what he's doing is he's taking the kind of stuff that Maimonides and Ibn Rushd and Ibn Sina did and said, this works better with Christianity. It fits best. It fits most of all. And so, Thomas Aquinas, and that's not really his last name as such, it's just like where he's from a little town called Aquino in northern Italy. 1225, 1274. Didn't quite make it to 50. Whereas Anselm was a Benedictine monk. Thomas Aquinas is a Dominican. And he writes two really, really big books. One is unfinished. Summa contra Gentiles. It looks like Summa contra Gentiles, but in Latin that would be Summa contra Gentiles. What that means is, what's a summa? Like a summary, okay? But not summary in the sense of like a little outline, like a summary in the sense of all of it. Like here is the sum against what? Against really the unbelievers or the non-believers. And so this is a book, a big book intended to make all the arguments that Maimonides might have said that favored Hashem, and all the kinds of arguments that people like Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd would have made arguing for Allah. This is a big book, really with the audience intended to be non-Christians of here's how Aristotle fits better with Christianity. And in this book he specifically answers arguments from Jews and Muslims. But he also writes another book called, and sometimes it's translated two ways in English, or even in Latin still, Summa Theologiae, or sometimes Summa Theologica. Take your pick. Either one is fine. And that's because in Latin, we don't have this in English, where if you flip around word order with cases, like if I say, I'm in the class. There's a way in Latin you can say the class I'm in, and it changes the endings of the words. Other languages are a bit like that too. So these endings both mean, in a little bit of a differently nuanced way, the sum of what? Theology. I'm going to talk about God. What stuff about him are you going to talk about? All of it. Now, this book is unfinished. And even at the end of his life in 1274, he kind of gave up and said, there's no way I can finish this book. Okay, it's like, and it's brilliant. It's a brilliant work of philosophy and theology, but he says it's not good enough. I don't think I can finish it. It's incomplete, and it's really not that good, says Thomas. It is. It's very nuanced. But he says it's just not good enough for God. And so he kind of quit. But let me show you some of the stuff that he develops. And he writes a lot of other works as well. All right, so there's tons of other books too, but this one's the big one. And he didn't finish it. It's still huge. But some of the things that he does to show you how he demonstrates, or how he includes Aristotelian kind of dynamics into Christian theology, one of the things that he develops here is the notion of transubstantiation. Now remember, there really is no Roman Catholic Church as such until after the Protestant Reformations. There's a church, there's a Catholic Church, sure. And then the Protestants come along and say, stuff's wrong with the church, right? And then later, what's being protested against kind of regroups at the Council of Trent and says, no, here's what we really believe. That's where the Roman Catholic Church is saying, no, where this starts. Before that, Luther was a Catholic. John Calvin was a Catholic. John Wycliffe was a Catholic. Jan Hus was a Catholic. Thomas Cranmer was a Catholic before. Okay, you can put uppercase C Catholic there, that's fine. But Roman Catholicism is really a response to Protestantism because there it's going for, no, we believe this collectively, cohesively. Okay, so this later becomes a Roman Catholic doctrine, but it actually finds its origins here in the 13th century with Thomas Aquinas. What is transubstantiation? Well, look, there's one of those fancy philosophical words hiding in there. Substantiation, substance. But this, transubstantiation. What does trans mean? Beyond. So beyond substance. What does this mean? Well, what did Jesus teach? And this relates to a specific Christian ritual that Thomas infuses with Aristotelian nuance. If you look at the end of the Gospels, really all four of them, but if you look at the end of the Gospels, what does Jesus do? He celebrates the Passover with his compatriots, the disciples, the apostles, right? But what's some of the stuff that he says, right? He gets out the bread and says, what? This is. Remember Aristotle talked about that verb to be, had all those different categories? What is Jesus using there? This is my body. Well, do we take that literally, or do we not? He said is. Is it? Is the bread Jesus' body? This is my blood, which is shed for the forgiveness of... He doesn't say, this represents my blood. It does if you're a Baptist. Okay, no, let me be fair here. Baptists would say, he's saying this is like metaphorical or representational. It's not literally. That's a Baptist teaching in response to this, which develops here. Where Thomas says, what does it mean when he says is there? It means exactly what it says. Literally, it is his body. This is bread. No, it's not. It is Jesus' body. Well, it looks like bread. Well, how could that be possible? Because it is miraculous. Every Sunday, however often there is a consecration of the Mass and the Eucharistic meal, however often that occurs, whether it's every Sunday or every day, however often it is, that is a miracle each and every time. Because here's what happens in transubstantiation. Remember, basically you have the 10 categories that Aristotle talked about. You've got essence, right? Which, another name for that is substance. Remember, that's what something is. And then you've got those 9 other categories, right? Where it is, how it is, quality, all those other things. That are its accidents. What it looks like, what it's on, all those things. 9 other categories there. Well, you've got before consecration, that's when the priest here, not the pastor, that's part of Protestantism that comes later. When the priest puts his hands upon the Eucharistic elements, puts his hands on the stuff. What stuff is on the table? Bread and wine? What is it? It is bread and wine. What accidents does it have? It has the accidents of bread and wine. That is, what's on it? Essentially, like what is on the table? Bread and wine. What does it look like? Bread and wine. What's it taste like? Bread and wine. What does it smell like? Bread and wine. What's under the ceiling? Bread and wine. All that stuff. All those other 9 categories. What's there? Before consecration. After consecration, priest lays his hands on the elements and says, Christ, our Passover lamb, has sacrificed for us, therefore let us keep the feast, albeit this would be in Latin at the time. What's on the table now? Corpus Christi et sanguinus Christi. What is on the table? Christ's body and Christ's blood is on the table. It's not a metaphor, it is. However, the essence or substance has changed, but the accidents have remained the same. So what does it look like? Bread and wine. So, in this notion of transubstantiation, you can't do any of this without Aristotelian lingo. That's the point that I want to emphasize. What happens? This substance changes upon consecration. It was bread and wine. Now, it is not. You're telling me the stuff that tastes like bread, looks like bread, if I leave it out, maybe it'll mold like bread. It's not bread. It is not bread any longer. It is something else, substantially and essentially. But it has all the accidents of bread and wine. And by accidents, they're like all the other features, but not the substance. The substance is something else. That's why if there are any leftovers, those elements are taken care of. You don't just throw them down the drain. All right, hypothetically. The priest will usually finish the cup for that reason. And the bread's taken care of. So this is transubstantiation. But again, I want to emphasize there's no way to conceive of this without understanding Aristotelian language. And it's using Aristotelian language to explain the miraculous. You want to get what's going on there? Now, the Protestants are going to all have different answers. They're all going to say no, but in different ways. So Calvinists are going to say, no. It's actually, there's a union with Christ's body that's in heaven. Lutherans are going to say, no, there's consubstantiation. It's Christ's presence is everywhere. Baptists are going to say, this is all something metaphorical. It's representational, because there's not really a sacrament going on, there's an ordinance going on. All I'm going to say no, because the Protestants, there's a theme in Protestantism that we'll get to when we move forward a couple of centuries. Protestantism, the theme is, I know people know about sola fide and sola scriptura and all those kinds of things, like go back to the Bible. But honestly, it's go back to the Bible and away from Aristotle is a theme in Protestantism. So let's take a look at some more Thomism. The main thing that's going to be important for our purposes in Thomism that sticks around in philosophy is this. Thomas doesn't like what he reads in Anselm. Okay, remember, because what do we have in Anselm? Remember, God is that than which nothing greater can be thought. Sure. Can you prove that, though, really? And Thomas says, no, the problem with that, and it goes back to that painting. What is Anselm doing when he says, just look at the word? He's doing this. Just think about the concept really hard, and it'll be sort of revealed to you. If I take that painting still as a model, and Thomas is an Aristotelian, what's going to be the shift from this to, yep. That's not demonstrable. And what we want is demonstration. Now, what does demonstration look like? So remember, Aristotle's more of an empiricist. Look around you. Well, that's what Thomas wants to do. You want to prove the existence of God? Look around. Don't look inside. Don't just try and meditate on the concept itself, like Anselm did. That's neat. And frankly, he's right. God does exist. Thomas is going to agree with that, sure. But you got there through the wrong means. There's something inadequate about trying to prove it that way. So what he does now he does a different one in Summa Contra Gentiles. He has different arguments for the existence of God. But Thomas has arguments for the existence of God in the Summa Theologiae, which are called cosmological arguments. And frankly, the last one is teleological. So 4 cosmological and 1 teleological. As opposed to what we saw in Anselm. Anselm's argument is considered ontological. Just think about the concept of the being of God itself, and you'll get there. So what does it mean? What does cosmological mean? Look at the cosmos. That's just the Greek word for universe. Look at the cosmos. And I said one is teleological. What does that mean? Look at the telos. What's telos? The end, purpose, or goal of something. I mentioned a little bit of this when we were talking about Aristotle. Okay? There's going to be an argument that proves that the universe exists by looking at the end of things. Sometimes that one's called intelligent design. Well, granted, in Thomas, that means something a little bit different than what it means today. And here I want to explain Thomas's format. If you open Thomas Aquinas anywhere, he has this format that to us looks very confusing. So I want to explain the format, and then once you know that, you're like, oh, okay. If you don't recognize the format, you'll think he ends up contradicting himself quite a bit. Because he'll say things like, here's why God doesn't exist. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute, what's he doing? He's following this format. And basically what this is called the scholastic method. And it is the full version of, anybody remember like in high school, what's the high school essay? Intro paragraph, 3 paragraphs of explanation, and then a conclusion paragraph to wrap it up, right? That is the kiddie version of this. Okay, so over time that has turned into a little condensed version of this. So what's going on here? Question. The question is the thesis, which is always a positive question. Positive not in the sense of, it makes you feel good, but positive in the sense of, is this thing a thing? Okay, so he might ask something like, what is anger? And then immediately following the question, and let's just say, I don't think he has a section on what is anger, but let's just take this and run with it. Objections would be saying things like here's reasons why anger doesn't exist. Okay, there's no such thing as anger. People have said that. There's no really anger, there's just passion or something like that. And you would say, here's what people have said against that, sure. Contrarian. On the other hand, here's some other person that's an expert, and will always be some kind of expert or authority. Here's something that seems like a contrary opinion. It seems to look at the opposite of what the objections would say. And then responsio, that is where Thomas is giving you full Thomas. And he's saying, here's what I think. And then finally, he will reply to objections and say, oh, those objections that I introduced earlier, here's why all those are wrong. Okay, so that's the method. And so that's why when he asks all these questions in here, can it be demonstrated that God exists? What is God? What are the names of God? We see this. And I'm just going to go, this is actually on 469. 5 ways. 5 ways to do what? Prove God. So here's what he says. 469 in the actual book. Does God exist? What does he do? Well, that's their question. Does God exist? All right, it says there in English, in this translation, whether God exists. Does he? So what's the first thing he's going to do? Objections. Here's reasons why God doesn't exist. It seems that, and that's what he does. It seems that God doesn't exist. Because if something's infinite, how does that work? Okay, because the notion of infinity seems kind of difficult to grasp. That's one thing he says. It seems to be like, how could one thing be responsible for so much stuff? So he gives a couple of kind of quasi-scientific reasons for why God wouldn't exist. Not just I don't like it, but here's reasons why that seems to be, how could everything have generated from one source, that kind of thing. That's not what I want to focus on. Then on the contrary, the Bible says, I am. That's God telling us he exists. So that's there, and so the Bible would be the authority here. The book of Exodus says this, I am. So it looks like, based on this authority that most of us Christians would accept, there might be scientific reasons why saying God doesn't exist, or philosophical ones, but here's this authority that says he does. Responsio, this is Thomas giving us Thomas. I answer that the existence of God can be proved in 5 ways. And the first 3 are going to seem very similar to each other. So what are the 5 ways? All right, way number 1. Let's take a look. The first and more manifest way, this is the easiest one to look at, in a sense. The first and most manifest way is the argument from motion. Remember, motion in the sense of change. We're dealing with Latin here, but the idea is the same. Whenever someone says motion, until about the 20th century, means any kind of change whatsoever. So things getting old is still motion. It's just moving across the room. It is certain. So what's way number 1? Motion. aka change. So what's the argument? How can you prove the existence of God from motion and from change? It is certain and evident to our senses that in the world some things are in motion. Now notice, what's the frame of the argument? It's not thinking about the concept of God. Look around. Okay? Look around. Some things are in motion. Now, whatever is moved by another, and nothing can be moved except it is in potentiality towards actuality. But nothing can be reduced from potentiality to actuality except by something in a state of actuality. Thus, that which is actually, and he gives us a bunch of examples here, right, that something can only be moved from a state of potentiality to actuality by something that's already actual. Right? So, you think of a soccer ball just sitting in a field. If there's no actual person there to kick it, is it ever going to get kicked? No. If there's no feet to kick it, and what about imaginary feet? No. If there's no real feet there to kick it, it's never going to get kicked. Maybe it'll get moved by the wind or some other things, but it's not going to get kicked unless there's someone there to kick it, right? Okay, so there has to be something actually there to make something go from potentiality to actuality. Can that go on to infinity? That's his question, because he says this. Now, it is not possible that the same thing should be at once in actuality and potentiality in the same respect, but only in different respects. For what is actually hot cannot simultaneously be potentially hot, and so on. Therefore, whatever is moved must be moved by another. That is, you can't really move yourself truly. Like, you can't create yourself, okay, in that sense. Okay, but if that's true, if that by which it is moved is itself moved, then this must also need to be moved by another, and that by another again. But this cannot go on to infinity, because then there would be no first mover, and consequently no other mover, seeing that subsequent movers only move insomuch as they are moved by the first mover, as the staff moves only because it's moved by the hand. So what he's saying, like imagine a game of like pool. Okay, so you've got, the 8 ball goes in the corner pocket. Well, what caused the 8 ball to get in there? Oh, the cue ball hitting the 8 ball. Well, what caused the cue ball to move? Well, the cue ball was hit by the cue stick. What moved the cue stick? Oh, my hands. Well, what caused that to happen? Well, the fact that I went into the pool hall that day. Well, what caused that to happen? Well, I was hungry and I went in for, like, this can go on. Can we really go do this all the way back to the origin of the universe? I mean, you could, but you can't have this go on to infinity, because then everything, you end up sounding like Al-Ghazali. What made this happen here? Like, what made this sound? Well, what really made this sound, if we went back to this, like, you have to go on to infinity. You can't do that. Or maybe you can, but Thomas is of the, like, infinite chains are not possible. They're not. So, that's out. Therefore, it is necessary to arrive at a first mover moved by no other, and this everyone understands as God. So that's argument number 1. How do we know God exists? Look around. Things change. That can't go to infinity. So there has to be a first mover unmoved. Now you heard the words potentiality and actuality in there too. A lot of Aristotelian linking. Now, these next two are going to seem very similar to the first one. Remember, we talked about motion. Argument number 2. The second way is from the nature of efficient cause. Remember, material, efficient, formal, final. How to get there. What made it get there, whatever it is at the moment. Now listen, the second way is from the nature of efficient cause. In the world of sensible things, we find there is an order of efficient causes. There is no case known, neither is it indeed possible, in which a thing is found to be the efficient cause of itself. For so it would be prior to itself, which is impossible. Now, in efficient causes, it is not possible to go on to infinity, because in all efficient causes, following in order, the cause of the intermediate cause, the intermediate cause. Now, here we're talking about causality, not just motion. Now, prima facie, that is at first glance. Well, how are these different? There is a nuanced difference between motion and causation. They're not the same thing. They're very similar, but they're not identical. So I can talk about change, and then I can talk about causation. They're very, very similar, but they're distinct, and they're nuanced. But what he's saying here, you can't go to infinity with this one either. Therefore, it is necessary to admit a first efficient cause to which everyone gives the name of God. I'm not sure about that jump he makes every time. Everyone calls this God. Everyone, I think, in-house calls this God. That's why you can say God is what? God is what? He's the first mover. The unmoved mover. Oh, what else? He's the first cause. Or the uncaused cause. That's that thought-thinking thought. Mover that doesn't move itself. So if you ever heard like the first mover argument or the first cause argument, there they are. Right there. This can't go back to infinity. There can't be an infinite chain, because that's absurd. Third way. It's from possibility and necessity. And runs us. So this one's a little bit different than the first two, but enough that I think we can still throw it in as saying these ones are very similar, and this one's the most confusing, I think, to modern readers. So let's work our way through it. Third one is taken from possibility and necessity. What's possibility? Things could be. What's necessity? Things must be. We find in nature, now again, the thing that I want to stress here, and this might seem speculative to you because it kind of is, but notice the difference here is not just think about the concept of God really hard. Remember the forms or something like that. It's look around at nature. Now these kinds of deductions are things you might say, well, this isn't quite empiricism, but it's still based on looking at nature. That's the way the arguments go. Look around. Look around. Okay. We find in nature things that are possible to be and not to be, since they are found to be generated and to be corrupted. Things coming into being, things going out of being. And consequently, it is possible for them to be and not to be. So here's just so far. We can imagine some things not existing, right? Could we envision a universe where this table doesn't exist? Sure. All right. Now, could we envision a universe where each of us individually doesn't exist? Yeah. Yeah, we wouldn't be in it, but we could picture the universe in that way. Okay. So we can imagine some things. We can imagine some things not existing. Okay. Could we imagine a universe where the Earth doesn't exist? We could. Where the galaxy is empty. Yeah, we could. Some things need not exist. That is, they don't have to be. We could picture that. Okay. And they could be, and they could be. We could also picture other things that could be. Okay. Maybe you could have another. Your parents could have had another child. You have another sibling. All right. That's not within the realm of impossibility. It could have been, but it wasn't. But it is impossible for these always to exist. For that which cannot be at some time is not. So everything that exists in the universe at some point it wasn't. And most likely will not be at some point. So in other words, there was a time before you were, and not just you, but really everything. There was a time before it was, and there will be a time where it is not. Okay, there was a time before you were born and a time after you're dead. Like we're here for a while, but that's true of everything. Everything's just here for a while. As a substance. Now, if this were true, and so consider this, therefore, if everything cannot be, then at one time there was nothing in existence. So since there's everything in the universe is contingent. That is, it could be, it could not be. It seems like there's more and more stuff. We could actually, if we rewound the universe, there was at one point where there was nothing. Because nothing that exists is permanent in the universe. There's nothing permanent. Everything comes in and out of being. If that's true, there had to be one time, if you hit rewind on the universe, there would be nothing. Okay? That presents us with a problem. Because if there was nothing, and we already need causes in motion to make things go, if there was nothing, how then is there now something? If this were true, even now there would be nothing in existence, because that which does not exist begins to exist only through something already existing. Therefore, if at one time nothing was in existence, it would have been impossible for anything to have begun to exist. And thus, even now, nothing would be in existence, which is absurd, because look around. Obviously, there's not nothing. Therefore, not all beings are merely possible, but there must exist something, the existence of which is necessary. So there must be something that must be. What's it going to be? What do you think? Are you noticing a pattern here? What's it going to be? God. All right, that's the answer. When we're talking about Christian philosophy, the answer is probably God if I ask a question. Okay. Because he says, but every necessary thing either has its necessity caused by another, or not. Now, it's impossible to go to infinity with necessary things which have their necessity caused by another. Therefore, we cannot but admit the existence of some being having of itself its own necessity, and not receiving it from another, but rather causing it in others their necessity. This we speak of as God. So this is the argument from necessity. The argument from necessity. Now, what those three have in common is that they all are based on you can't go to infinity. That's the way all three of those work. They all work because you can't have an infinite chain. It's called an infinite regress. You might say, well, but you can have an infinite chain. Like isn't that how fractals work and things like that? Not in medieval logic. Okay, no infinite chains. And that's the one, like I said, that one's, I think, of the three, that's the one that's the most confusing. So what is it again? The argument is everything either could be, in the universe, you could say could either be turned on or turned off, right, in the sense of being or not. But if that's true, if you rewind the universe far enough, there will be a point where there was nothing. But now there's something. So something had to get it going. So there must be something that exists that must be, has its own necessity, its mustness unto itself. Of course, that's God. 4. And this one, I think, is a little bit of a nod to Anselm. And a little bit of just a little tip of the hat to Neoplatonism. Like, Thomas is not a Neoplatonist. The fourth way is taken from the gradation to be found in things. So, gradation. Now notice it's based on things again. Look around. What gradation on things? Among beings, there are some more and some less good. There's that scale. So this one's referencing the scale. Good. Bad. Some things are better than others. And of course, this is resting on some kind of intuition. And by intuition, for my purpose here, I just mean something where we kind of know, where it seems like we know, we don't really know why. I'm not saying that it's true or not, but some sort of intuit. Like, what's better, puppies or cockroaches? Puppies. Anybody want to disagree? It just seems like intuitively true. Now, if we stop for a moment and thought about it, it's very difficult to come out with some kind of moral taxonomy of why one thing is better actually than the other. But that just feels right, doesn't it? We'll just roll with that. Some things are better than others. And then, you can go take this out. Angels are better than people. Why? Angels don't sin. Well, except for the ones that did. Okay. Christian theology. Okay, so some are better than others. Some more or less good, more or less true, more or less noble, and the like, but more or less are predicated different things according as they resemble in their different ways something which is the maximum. As a thing is said to be hotter according as it is more nearly resembles that which is hottest. Okay, so, in other words, if we're going to say things are better, like this thing's better than this thing, then we have a scale. And if we have a scale, there have to be poles on the scale. If you're going to say, well, this thing's better than this thing, well, then you have your concept of good and bad. What's at the top of good then? What's it going to be? God. There you go. You got it. All right. So because God is maximal goodness, yes. Because now the maximum in any genus is the cause of all of that genus, not cause in the sense of making it come into being, but there would be no scale had that thing not been there. Just like he says, like this medieval thought here, but just like fire is the cause of heat. Is fire the cause of the efficient cause? No, but like you can't talk about hot without some reference of some hot thing. Okay? So, for that reason, therefore, there must be also something which is to all beings the cause of their being, goodness, and every other perfection, and this we call God. This is based on gradations. In other words, scales. So you talk about, well, this is good. Well, this thing's good. You can't really talk about goodness unless God exists. This thing's better than this thing. Well, what's the best thing? You can't talk about anything being better unless you have a best. You can't. But here it's from, not just from the thought of it, but like look around at how we do this, and we say some things are better than others. You've got more being than this table. But what has the most being? God. Because there must be a maximum to every gradation. There must be.
So, again, I'm saying, back to I always do, there in essence is the concept of forms and all that other stuff, all that other Greek thought.
Yeah, I think it's hiding in this one a little bit.
I see everything.
I know you see it.
Everybody needs to hear it.
But the thing I want to emphasize is, even though it's there, even though there's a little bit of like form hiding there must be like hiding in the background. Still here, Thomas is basing this on some kind of proto-empiricism. Is it Baconian empiricism? No. In fact, that's what's going, I mentioned Protestantism is a rejection of Aristotle really in ethics and theology. A lot of the scientific Reformation, again, Reformation, like what Francis Bacon is doing, and what René Descartes is doing, what Isaac Newton is doing, is also a rejection of Aristotle in physics. And he said stuff like that, no, that's not right. If we look around, now he was right, like look around, but there's so much speculation in there that's not quite as observational as we want. We want a little bit less speculation. And we'll see that pan out. So what's way number 5? The fifth way, that's the teleological one. So the first 4 are look at, I say these have the infinite thing in common. You'll notice there is no infinite thing there. But I gotta say, these are the cosmological ones, the first 4. The fifth one is teleological. So it's based on the end purpose or goal of what? The universe. So listen. The fifth way is taken from the governance of the world. Look at the world. How does it work? We see that things which lack knowledge, such as natural bodies, act for an end. Okay. Things in nature that don't have brains or minds somehow know how to do stuff in nature. What do I mean by that? How do seeds know how to grow? Or anything. Any single-cell organism. How does it know how to grow? All right, plant seed in the ground. Seed powers activate. It's not sorcery. It's biology. how does it know what to do?
I'm just caught.
Well, and not exactly here. Like how? Yes, but also no. How do they know how to do it? How do they know how to do it? Because it looks like things in nature know how to do stuff. How do animals know how to, like, human beings, we are the weakest babies on the planet. We have the weakest babies of any species. Other animals know how to walk within 10 minutes of being born. Us, because of our giant heads, housing our big brains but our ridiculous bodies, how long does it take a human being to learn how to walk? Anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. I refuse to say 24 months. Okay, it's 2 years. Come on, babies. It can take that long, right? And then you ever seen like a little kid walk around when they do like the waddle thing? They don't know what they're doing. Other animals, on the other hand, know how to do things like instantaneously. The deer will just get up. How do they know how to do that? What training did they have? How do plants know how do flowers know how to unfurl? How do they know that? How do the trees know this time of year to launch that yellow powder all over my car? How do they know? In the sense of knowledge, like it seems like they know what to do without knowing what to do, without being educated. How can this be? And sometimes we can see animals doing conditioning, okay, to each other, but some things they just know by nature. Okay, not just intuition, but by instinct. How do they know how to do that? And again, Thomas is just like, look around. We know this. This is basic observation. But also, it's not just the biological either. If you let, like with gravity, if somehow when I let go, this marker knows to go down. Good boy. Okay, somehow it knows. How does it know how to do that? How do waters know to flow downstream? And so forth. How does it know? How do the clouds know what to do? How does everything in nature know how to behave the way it's supposed to? Well, and they act for an end. Everything has a purpose that they don't know themselves. They don't know why they're doing what they're doing, but they do it anyway. Things in nature. This is evident from their acting always or nearly always in the same way so as to obtain the best result. Hence, it is plain that they achieve their end not fortuitously, like, it just so happens, but they did the thing that they were supposed to do. But what? Not fortuitously, but designedly. That's why the big fancy name for this one is the teleological argument, sure, for the existence of God. But it's also called the argument from design, or intelligent design. Granted, that means something different today. Yeah, the modern intelligent or contemporary intelligent design is based off this notion, but the argument's a bit different how it works in 20th and 21st century. It just says, hey, look around. It looks like things know what to do. How could they know what to do unless we could put it in modern lingo, unless they were programmed to do so? The universe looks like it was programmed, where things have functions that they know how to perform, where they don't know that they're doing it, but it functions nevertheless. Just like a computer can be programmed, let's talk about something very, very easy. Basic computer programming. Press space bar, make space. Okay. But is your computer going to do that without having been programmed to do that? No, you can hit that space bar all you want, nothing's happening. Okay. But once that very, very simple command is in there, which is basically a modus ponendo ponens command. Okay. If user does X, execute action Y. I did X. Y happens. Well, it's getting cold, and we're birds. Let's fly south. Okay? This happened? Let's do it. Those kinds of instinctive kinds of actions are themselves programmatic. So it would appear, says Thomas. Because they don't know. They're like, okay, we're birds. Where do you guys want to go this winter? Aruba? Huh? I hear it's great this time of year. And we don't need airports. Let's go. They just know. They know where to go without ever having been there. How do they know how to do that? Looks like they're programmed. And again, Thomas wouldn't use the word program, but I think analogously it works. Well, now, whatever lacks knowledge cannot move towards an end unless it be directed by some being endowed with knowledge and intelligence, as the arrow is directed by the archer. So what he's saying here is also, analogously, like let's say you're walking down you're walking in the middle of the woods and all of a sudden you see arrows sticking out of a tree. What would you assume? Okay. Someone must have, they either shot the arrows there, because that's what you do with arrows, or maybe they stabbed arrows into the tree. You would not say, look at this. Somehow something that looks like arrows is growing out of the tree. It looks like someone put arrows here. It looks like maybe they were shot because there's some impact here. Maybe someone just put them in there, but someone put those arrows in there. That's not a naturally occurring phenomenon. Yeah, you would assume there was some shooter of arrows. Same thing. Look around, and just like it seems like just as obvious as how did these arrows get here, how do these animals, how do these plants, how does nature know what to do? Because there's an archer. And everybody knows this is God. That's the argument. That was a bit. Therefore, some intelligent being exists by whom all natural things are directed toward their end, and this being we call God. There's the 5 ways. And these are very, very different from what Anselm was doing. This is how God exists. And this is how one knows that God exists without having, notice here, this is Thomas's point too, any one of these 5, do I need to go, well, let me prove this to you. Open up your Bibles to Matthew chapter 3, verse 20. Do I have to do that here? This is not crack open your Bibles. Neither is it, let's turn our attention to what Aristotle said in Metaphysics, book 12, section 6. Go outside and look around. And if you observe all that's around you, you'll come to the conclusions that way. That's what makes this argument different. Whereas even what Anselm was doing, meditate very hard on the concept. We know this kind of stuff because it says this, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God, that's in Psalms. This is look around. This is observe nature itself. Not merely, no, Thomas Aquinas writes a lot of stuff on the Bible as well, and on theology. So he's not saying don't be uninterested in those things, not that those things don't matter, but that you don't need to appeal to mere texts alone to realize truths about the existence of God. Faith, fides, is one route, but reason is another. I'll give you the Latin. Fides, ratio. So you want that stuff. Now listen, you look at nature, you'll learn all this stuff about God, that God exists. That's reason. That's not faith. That's not the Nicene Creed. Now you want to know that special stuff about how does the Trinity work? How does the hypostatic union work with Jesus? That you will need to open up your Bible. Okay, that very particular stuff about how the inward, that stuff that he's revealed. There's no way you can just go out in nature and figure all that stuff out. But that stuff is faith. Reason also gets you to the existence of God. At least God is creator, not maybe God is redeemer. So reason will get you to a similar thing. That's why Aristotle was able to figure out God exists, that there's a theos. He didn't know it was the triune God, because that comes from faith, but at least knowing the existence of God comes from reason. It's not, everything that has to do with God here is not faith. Now, if you ask someone now that question, for the most part, I think that's what the answer you get. Well, it seems perhaps maybe scientifically that God exists. That's faith. So that's something that's a little bit different today than we would see in the Middle Ages. In fact, that book, Summa Theologiae, the first question in the book is theology a science? Now, if I go over to the science building over here, is there a theology department? No. But this betrays a term that we need to discuss too, just for a moment. When he says it's a science, he uses the Latin word scientia, which is a translation really from the Greek gnosis. What is scientia? Science, sure. Literally, it's the word for knowledge. Scientia. So the word science just means knowledge. So is theology a branch of knowledge, is what Thomas is asking. Sure. But what we're going to see later is that science is something, knowledge of nature kind of becomes its own thing. Okay, that what we would call science today, because we don't just use the word science to talk about knowledge in general. Okay. I think for our purposes, that's all I want to say about Thomas. Yeah, that's the big stuff I'm talking about. Sometimes I do medieval philosophy, where I spend a lot more time on Thomas. But I think for our purposes here in intro, I think that would be good. Questions? Comments? Great thoughts. Okay.
Do they ever have like a response to the then what made God question?
To be fair, I'll go and give you exactly what the response is. If you're like, wait a minute, okay. You see, all right, we've got every cause has an effect, right? Well, if that's true, all right, and this thing caused this thing, and this thing caused this thing, and this thing actually is an effect, and so on. You go back, and so you finally get to God. And you say, well, what caused God? The immediate response here is the Christian, well, God's not an effect. Like, full stop. Like, we're good, we're done. So that's it. Like, so in medieval thought, that was never really a problem. Because you just say, all right, cause and effect, cause and effect. What has effects? Causes. God's not an effect, therefore God does not require a cause. Because that's exactly what Bertrand Russell brings up. There's an essay by Bertrand Russell, famous 20th century philosopher, who writes a little tiny book called Why I'm Not a Christian, where he brings that up exactly. And other people about, well, what caused God? And the Christians would simply say in the Middle Ages, nothing, because God's not an effect. And you only have effects, or only come from causes. But God's not an effect, so he doesn't need a cause. So the problem was what again? I'm not making that claim. I'm saying the Christians would, though.
Yeah.
Right? Because does that... Well, then that might be a fallacy called special pleading. Where you're like, yeah, but this thing's different. Okay, everything else needs a cause, but that's a different thing. Why is it different? Well, because it's God. All right, and so sometimes people will call that special pleading, where you make like well, God's different. God doesn't quite work that way like other things. But yeah, that would be the Christian response. Okay, let's, who's next? All right. Oh, Seeger of Brabant, who actually comes a little bit before Thomas in terms of popularity. Because a lot of what Thomas is doing is what, in his later career, is if Seeger said it, it's probably wrong. Sort of. So who's Seeger of Brabant? Let me also say, this is not like a testable question. Thomas Aquinas, while from northern Italy, most of what he's doing in Paris, in Paris, the University of Paris. So Italian, but and University of Paris is a center of learning very early on. This is the late Middle Ages. Okay. Well, Seeger of Brabant. So who's he? He is the leader of a group of Christian thinkers called the Latin Averroists. What does that mean? Who's Averroes? Averroes is the Latinization of the Islamic name Ibn Rushd. So these are Christian followers of Ibn Rushd. Sort of. Why do I say sort of? Well, remember how Ibn Rushd said, listen, there's difference between dialectic and demonstration. Basically, when you're talking about the conflicts between what the Quran says and what science and philosophy say, know your audience, right? Ibn Rushd said that. They kind of have a mistranslated, watered-down version of this, where they think this is what Ibn Rushd said, and it's not quite. So, Seeger talks about this notion of games, like Gemini, twin truths. Okay, so there's double truth. Remember when we have our two departments? We have faith, and we have reason. Well, he agrees with Thomas that there are two roads of getting at the same truth. Remember, Thomas had said earlier, like if you look around at nature, if you do the sciencey philosophy stuff, you'll get to God. Not the God of faith, but you'll get to truth about God. And if you go through the faith route, you'll get to different truths about God. Seeger agrees both of those are legitimate routes, but something can be true here that is false here, and vice versa. Something might be true here that's false here. Now, when he says this, he thinks he's doing what Ibn Rushd said. Now, Ibn Rushd said, no, depending on who you're talking to in your audience, shift what you're saying. Like, you don't want to talk to someone who doesn't really have the wherewithal to talk about deep Quranic literature. Don't start doing things that are going to make them question things. Because then you're just messing with people by being irresponsible. Seeger is misinterpreting that to mean, yeah, some things are true here, and at the same time not true here. So in other words, you can do things like this. God created the world in 6 days, and he did not create the world in 6 days. And both those statements are true, because it depends on your perspective that you're looking at. In faith, that is true. But in the domain of reason, that's not. We have no proof or evidence scientifically that the earth was created in 6 days. But it's not that one disproves the other. They're both true at the same time. Now, the reason why Thomas Aquinas really didn't like this is because if we go back and take a look at Aristotle also talked about, we didn't bring it up in here, he has these things that he talks about called the laws of logic. One of them is the law of non-contradiction, which is that something cannot both be and not be at the same time in the same sense. But if you're saying the world was created in 6 days and the world was not created in 6 days, that kind of looks like a contradiction. To which Seeger would say, yes. Yes, it is. What great wisdom is this? Again, you have to kind of go outside of your own mind to see it. So, granted, again, he is misinterpreting Ibn Rushd himself. So is this actually Averroism? Is this actually the teaching of Ibn Rushd? No, this is the teaching of Seeger, who thinks he's doing his own kind of thing. Regardless, in 1270, as a result, in the year 1270, Averroism is considered heresy by the church, and all his books are banned. And so the teaching of Ibn Rushd is considered heresy because of what Seeger did. And Seeger, you see, is still alive there, so he gets in trouble and censured. That's all I want to say about him, I think. Just notice there's a different way. Like, Thomas Aquinas talks a lot about what Ibn Rushd did. He has a lot of, really, affection for Ibn Rushd, too, for his thought. But this interpretation of him is not favored. Granted, Thomas Aquinas is not even popular in his own day, either. He's somebody later, really in the late 1500s, that Thomas Aquinas becomes really almost considered, if Thomas Aquinas said it, it's almost identical with Roman Catholic thought. Not in his own day, in the 1200s, but later in the, say, 1570, at the Council of Trent, 1576. Thomas is considered a doctor, that is a teacher of church thought. Who do we got next? A pair of Franciscans. John Duns Scotus, not to be confused with John Scotus Erigena, that we already talked about. And William Ockham. Guillaume d'Ockham. Both Scotus and Ockham are Franciscans, so followers of the Order of St. Francis. Both considered the most important thinkers of the late Middle Ages, like after Thomas, but before the Protestant Reformations. What do I want to say about them? Well, following Thomas, there's a big problem that comes back up again. The problem, and they're both scholastics too, so they use this method as well. It's called in the Middle Ages at this point the problem of universals, which is the problem again of the forms. What are essences? What's substances? Now's about the time they shift from using essentia to substantia, substance. Where are the forms? Where are the essences? Do they exist? Because, yeah, we've had this Aristotelian turn now where we're like, no, no, no. The forms of things, like, if you want to know what a table is, look at the table, right? Instead of thinking about the form of the table. Yeah, sure. How much does God know about that? Remember, the Jews and the Muslims had wrestled with this question as well. Maimonides, Gersonides, and others, like, how much does God know? Does he know particulars? Does he know us individuals down here? Or does he only know the essences? What does he know? Scotus, now, he's so unliked later, after the Middle Ages, that if you've ever heard someone called a dunce, that's where that comes from. And if you look at a picture of Scotus, he has kind of like a pointy hat on. They used to do this 100 years ago, where someone was considered an idiotic student, they'd put them in the corner, put a dunce hat on them, and they were called a dunce. So it's a word, today still it kind of has a connotation of idiot. Scotus is no idiot, but he's very much not liked later because he is a realist. Realist. He really believes what? Universals exist. There are essences. There are forms. Now, are they in God's mind, or is there a world of forms? Maybe, but there have to be essences. There has to be. Otherwise, we get into problems specifically with the Trinity. If you want to be somebody that says there are no essences, why is that? Like, no essences don't really exist. There's this table, and there's that table, and there's that table, but there's no form of a table. There's no essence of a table. There's no essences. If you want to do that, this is a problem for Christianity, because what is God? He's three persons for sure, but he's one what? Essence. And so if you want to say essences don't exist, you're committed yourself to saying, well, then there's no God then. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. If there are no essences, and God is an essence, then God does not exist. So there must be essences. So that's why there must be essences if we think about it that way. Okay, and there's a sense in which he says, though, where is the essence? Where are the universals, though? Where are they? Well, the essence is both kind of in the mind of God and in the thing. It's kind of a combo of Plato and Aristotle. Where is the table? Where is tableness? There. Tableness is here somewhere. But it's also in God's mind as well. Not that God's mind is a place with axes. Okay, like we can go into God's mind. X coordinates, Y coordinates, Z coordinates. Here we can find the essence of God in his. It's not like that. It's somewhere in God's mind there's the form of the table. Okay. And also, another reason why the notion of essence is important is whom did Christ save? Did he save humanity itself or individual persons? The church or individual persons? And Scotus says it was his people, whoever that is, and it's not limited to a certain number. Whoever his people are, that is Christ's people. Whoever is redeemed, that whole quantity. It's not just like a list, like, okay, we got a list here, you're not on it. Okay. However, it's not some designated quantity of individuals, but there's a mass called the church, the real church, he would say, too. Most authors would say, Christian authors would say that. So there's the redeemed of Christ people that are an essence. There's an essence of humanity that Christ came to save, whether or not they're actually redeemed or not. This is in opposition to our next thinker, which is William of Ockham. So I think this is a perfect transition point here, too, because we're out of time. What William of Ockham is going to say is, no. He's not a realist. And it's not that essences don't exist. They don't exist in the way that we think so. Like, can we talk about tables? This is what's new. In fact, Ockham is in many ways a forerunner of modern science. Okay. Essences. Like, is there such a thing as a table, like tableness itself? Yeah. What is it? A concept in your mind. Like, you have an idea of a table? Yeah, you have the idea of the table. It's not floating up in the world of forms. It's not in God's mind somewhere. Maybe God knows about it, but we don't know that. All we know is that I've got ideas, and where are those ideas? Here. The ideas are here. Now, they're from observation, sure, but the ideas that I have are here in my mind. Whether my mind is actually coterminous with my brain or not. I'm pointing to my head, but I think you know what I mean by it. So we'll talk a little bit more about Occam. And Occam, like I said, is kind of the forerunner of modern science because of the way we're not talking about essences anymore. The causations are going to get trimmed down in terms of what we do in science. And also Luther, Martin Luther in many ways, is influenced by William of Occam as well. All right, that's it. I will see you all next week.